One slip of paper. That was all it took to bring a billion-dollar empire to its knees, or save it from total destruction. Julian Thorne thought he was celebrating his engagement to the love of his life. He didn't know that the woman smiling across the table had just signed his death warrant. But in the shadows of the restaurant, someone was watching. A waitress, invisible to the rich and powerful, saw what no one else did. When she slid a napkin under his wine glass, everything changed. What would you do if a stranger handed you a note saying the person you loved was about to destroy you? The clinking of silver against bone china was the only music Adela Jenkins knew by heart. At l'Orangerie, the most exclusive dining establishment in Manhattan, silence was a commodity, and the staff were paid to be ghosts. Adela adjusted the collar of her starch-stiff uniform, fighting the ache in her lower back. It was a Tuesday, but inside these gold-leafed walls, days of the week didn't matter. Only power mattered. And tonight, Table 4 was the center of the universe. Julian Thorne sat there, the CEO of Thorne Heavy Industries, a man whose net worth hovered somewhere in the 11 figures. He was younger than the tabloids made him look, sharp-jawed, with eyes the color of cold steel, currently softened by the woman sitting across from him. Elena Vance, a former model turned philanthropist, though Adela had never seen her donate anything but disdain to the waitstaff. She was wearing a red dress that likely cost more than Adela's entire college tuition debt. "More wine, monsieur?" Adela asked, her voice a practiced whisper. Julian didn't look at her. He nodded, his gaze fixed on Eleanor. "To us," he said, lifting his glass, "and to the merger. Tomorrow morning, everything changes." Adela poured the 1982 Waitress with a steady hand, despite the trembling in her legs. She was invisible. They all were. That was the rule. If a waiter dropped a fork, it was a tragedy. If a waiter overheard a secret, it was a liability. Adela retreated to the service station, her eyes lingering on Table 4. There was something off tonight. Usually, Elena was effusive, touching Julian's arm, laughing too loud. Tonight, she was tense. Her eyes kept darting to her clutch bag sitting on the table, and then to the grand entrance of the restaurant. "Table 7 needs bread," the maitre d', Henri, snapped at Adela as he breezed past. "Stop daydreaming, Jenkins." "Yes, Henri." Adela grabbed the bread basket, but as she passed the corridor leading to the private restrooms, she saw a flash of red silk. Elena. She had slipped away from the table while Julian was reviewing the wine list. Adela shouldn't have stopped. She should have kept walking. But the tone of Elena's voice, echoing slightly from the marble antechamber of the restroom, froze her in place. It wasn't the voice of a loving girlfriend. It was the voice of a predator. Adela pressed herself against the alcove wall, feigning a check of her apron strings. "He has no idea," Elena whispered, her voice low and urgent. "Yes, the transfer codes are on his phone. He unlocks it for me when he shows me photos. I can get them." A pause. "No, Marcus. Don't worry about the security team. I dismissed the personal guard for the night. I told Julian I wanted a private evening. We are exposed." Adela's breath hitched. Marcus. Marcus Sterling. Julian Thorne's biggest rival. The man who had been trying to hostile take over Thorne Industries for 5 years. "They are in position?" Elena asked. "Good. As soon as we leave the restaurant, do it. I want it to look like a robbery gone wrong. I don't care if he gets hurt, just get the phone." Adela felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was a hit, a setup, robbery gone wrong. That meant violence. Elena hung up. The click of her heels on the marble grew louder. Adela scrambled, ducking into the service pantry just as Eleanor swept past, composing her face into a mask of loving adoration before she re-entered the dining room. Adela stood in the dark pantry, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She held the bread basket in a vice grip. "Stay out of it," her brain screamed. "You need this job. You have rent. You have your mother's medical bills. If you cause a scene and you're wrong, you're fired. If you're right, you're dead." She looked through the crack in the door. Julian was smiling at Elena as she sat back down. He looked so relaxed, vulnerable. He was a shark in the boardroom, but tonight he was just a man in love. Adela thought of her father, a good man destroyed by men like Marcus Sterling, men who viewed people as collateral damage. She couldn't let it happen, not on her watch, but she couldn't speak. If she walked up and said, "Your girlfriend is setting you up," Elena would deny it. Julian would believe the woman in the red dress over the waitress with the scuffed shoes. She would be dragged out by security. She needed to be subtle. Adela grabbed her order pad. Her hands shook violently. She tore off a small slip of paper. She needed to be concise. She grabbed a pen. "Your girlfriend sold you out. They're in position. Trust no one." She hesitated. It wasn't enough. She added one more line. "Check her call log. Marcus." She folded the paper until it was a tiny square, smaller than a postage stamp. She took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and walked back out onto the floor. She grabbed a fresh bottle of sparkling water. It was the only excuse to return to the table so soon. As she approached table 4, the tension in the air was palpable, though Julian seemed oblivious. Elena was checking her watch. "More water, madam? Monsieur?" Adela asked. "We're fine," Elena snapped, not looking up. "Please," Julian said, offering a polite, dismissive smile. "Just a bit." This was it. Adela reached across the table to refill Julian's glass. As she did, she feigned a stumble. Just a slight one. The bottle knocked against the base of his wine glass. "Oh, I am so sorry, sir," she gasped. "Careful!" Elena hissed. Julian reflexively reached out to steady the wine glass. In that split second of chaos, Adela's hand brushed his palm. She pressed the tiny square of paper into his hand, her eyes locking with his for a fraction of a second. Her eyes were wide, pleading. "Read it." Julian froze. He felt the paper. He was a man of instinct. You didn't build an empire without knowing when the wind changed. He didn't pull his hand away. He didn't drop the paper. He curled his fingers around it. "It's fine," Julian said, his voice steady, though his eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Adela. "No harm done." "I apologize, sir," Adela murmured, backing away. "I'll leave you to your evening." She retreated to the shadows near the kitchen door, her heart in her throat. She watched. Julian waited until Adela was gone. He picked up his napkin, bringing his hand under the table as if to adjust his trousers. When his hand came back up, the paper was gone. He took a sip of wine. His eyes drifted to Eleanor. "You seem distracted, darling," Julian said. His voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by a terrifying neutrality. "Just excited for tomorrow," Eleanor smiled, reaching for his hand. Julian didn't take it. Instead, he picked up the menu, opening it to shield his face. Inside the fold of the leather menu, he opened the tiny note. Adela watched from 20 feet away. She saw Julian's shoulders stiffen. She saw the way his knuckles turned white as he gripped the leather. He read the words. "Your girlfriend sold you out. Check her call log. Marcus." Julian closed the menu. He set it down slowly. He looked at Eleanor. Really looked at her. He saw the sweat on her upper lip, the way her eyes kept darting to the door. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Who are you calling?" Elena asked, her voice spiking an octave. "I thought no phones tonight." "Just checking the time," Julian lied smoothly. But he wasn't. He was typing a message, not to his assistant, but to the head of his private security, Mason, who was currently waiting in the car 3 blocks away, per Elena's request. Code red. Inside. Now. Adela leaned against the wall, feeling faint. She had thrown the stone. Now she had to watch the avalanche. The atmosphere at Table 4 had shifted from romantic to radioactive. Julian Thorne sat with the stillness of a predator, waiting to strike, his eyes fixed on the woman he had intended to propose to that very evening. The velvet box in his jacket pocket felt heavy, like a stone of judgment. He needed proof. The waitress, what was her name? He hadn't even looked at her tag. Could be crazy. A jealous ex-employee? A plant by a different rival to sow discord? But the specific mention of Marcus was too precise. Only 3 people knew the merger was happening tomorrow: himself, Elena, and his lawyer. If Marcus Sterling knew, there was a leak, and the leak was sitting across from him, eating lobster risotto. "Julian, you're staring," Elena said, her laugh brittle. "Is there something on my face?" "Just admiring the view," Julian said. "You know, I was thinking about security." Elena's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Security? Why?" "I feel exposed tonight," he lied, watching her reaction. "Maybe I should call Mason back." "No," Elena said, too quickly. She reached across the table and grabbed his hand. Her palm was damp. "Don't ruin the mood, Julian. It's just us. You're safe with me." Safe with me. The irony tasted like ash in his mouth. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open. 3 men entered. They weren't wearing the standard dinner jackets of the clientele. They wore oversized trench coats, despite the mild weather. They didn't wait to be seated. They scanned the room, their eyes locking on to Table 4 instantly. Adela, watching from the service station, felt her stomach drop. "They're here." She saw Elena's eyes widen, not in fear, but in recognition. Then Elena feigned confusion. "Who are they, Julian?" Julian didn't answer. He stood up. The lead man, a brute with a scar running through his eyebrow, reached inside his coat. "Thorne!" the man shouted. "Get down!" Chaos erupted. Diners screamed. Tables were overturned. But Julian didn't get down. He flipped the heavy oak table. Plates, crystal, and the 1982 Waitress crashed to the floor, creating a barrier between him and the gunman. "Elena, get behind me!" he shouted. A test. She didn't move behind him. She scrambled sideways, away from the line of fire. "Don't shoot me!" she screamed at the men. "I'm not with him." It was the final nail in the coffin of his trust. The gunman raised a suppressed pistol. Phut-phut. 2 rounds shattered the wood of the overturned table. Julian was unarmed. He crouched behind the barricade, looking for an exit. The kitchen. That was his only way out. He sprinted, low to the ground, towards the service doors. "Get him!" the lead gunman roared. As Julian crashed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, he nearly collided with Adela. She was frozen, holding a tray of desserts. "You!" Julian grabbed her arm. "You wrote the note." "Yes," she squeaked. "Is there a back exit?" "The loading dock," she stammered. "Through the pantry. Show me, now." He didn't give her a choice. He dragged her with him. The kitchen staff were diving under prep tables as the gunman burst through the service doors behind them. "This way!" Adela yelled, adrenaline finally taking over. She dropped the tray, tarts and custards splattering everywhere, and ran toward the heavy steel doors at the back. She punched the code into the keypad. 19804. The door buzzed. They burst out into the cool night air of the alleyway. The smell of garbage and wet pavement hit them. "Where is your car?" Adela panted. "Block away. Compromised," Julian snapped. He looked at her. You saved my life in there. But if they see you, you're a loose end. You have to come with me." "What? No, I have to go home." "You don't have a home anymore, not tonight," Julian said grimly. "Marcus Sterling doesn't leave witnesses." Before Adela could argue, a black SUV screeched into the alley, blocking the exit. The headlights blinded them. Adela screamed, backing up against the brick wall. Julian stepped in front of her, fists clenched, ready to fight. The window rolled down. "Get in, boss!" It was Mason, the head of security. "Thank God," Julian breathed. He yanked the back door open and shoved Adela inside, diving in after her. "Go, drive!" Julian roared. Bullets sparked against the chassis of the armored SUV as Mason floored it. The vehicle roared out of the alley, sideswiping a dumpster, and sped onto the main avenue. Inside the car, the silence was heavy. Julian sat back, adjusting his suit jacket, though his shirt was torn and stained with wine. He looked at Adela. She was huddled in the corner of the leather seat, her waitress uniform stained with chocolate mousse from the dropped tray. She was shaking uncontrollably. "Who are you?" Julian asked, his voice low but intense. "Adela," she whispered. "Adela Jenkins." "Well, Adela Jenkins," Julian said, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket and handing it to her. "You just became the most important person in my life, and the most dangerous liability." He turned to the driver. "Mason, take us to the safe house. The penthouse is compromised, and kill all electronic signals. They're tracking us." "Already done, sir," Mason said from the front. Julian turned back to Adela. His eyes were hard. "Now, tell me exactly what you heard, word for word, because if you lie to me, I'll open this door and push you out." Adela looked into the eyes of the billionaire. She realized the danger hadn't ended in the restaurant. It had just begun. The safe house was not a house. It was a brutalist concrete bunker disguised as a mid-century modern mansion in the hills of upstate New York, accessible only by a private helicopter, which they had boarded at a private airfield in Jersey. Adela had never been in a helicopter. Under different circumstances, the view of the city lights fading away might have been beautiful. Tonight, it looked like a fading lifeline. They landed on a dark pad. Mason ushered them inside. The interior was cold, minimalist, and filled with screens. Julian poured himself a drink. Whiskey, neat, hands steady now. He didn't offer her one. He pointed to a steel chair in the center of the living room. "Sit." Adela sat. She felt small, dirty, and terrified. "Start talking," Julian said, leaning against a marble island. "How did you know about the call? How did you know about Marcus?" "I told you," Adela said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. She was angry now. She had saved him, and he was treating her like a criminal. "I was in the hallway. Elena went to the bathroom. She thought she was alone. She called someone. She mentioned the transfer codes on your phone. She said to make it look like a robbery." Julian swirled his drink. "And the name Marcus?" She said, "No, Marcus. Don't worry about the security team." Julian closed his eyes. The confirmation hurt him, she could see that, but he buried it instantly under a layer of rage. "Do you know who Marcus Sterling is?" Julian asked. "Everyone knows who he is," Adela said. "He's the CEO of Sterling Dynamics. He's your competitor." "He's not just a competitor. He's a shark. And if Eleanor is working for him..." Julian paced the room. "She has access to my private server, my biometric data. If she has my phone..." He patted his pockets. His phone was gone. "Damn it!" Julian shouted, hurling his glass against the wall. It shattered. "I left it on the table when I flipped it." "She has the phone," Adela said quietly. "She said she needed the transfer codes. It's for the merger, isn't it?" Julian stopped pacing. He looked at her with new interest. "You're smart for a waitress." "I was a law student," Adela shot back, "before my dad got sick and I had to drop out to pay bills. I know what a hostile takeover looks like." Julian walked over to her. He loomed over the chair. "If she has my phone, she can bypass the two-factor authentication for the bank transfers. But she needs a retinal scan or a voice print." "She has your voice," Adela said. "She has hours of recordings of you, and she said you unlock the phone for her when you show her photos." Julian paled. "The facial recognition. She's been training it on her face as a secondary user. I thought she was just playing games." "Sir," Mason interrupted from a bank of monitors. "We have activity. The Thorn Industries accounts are flagging unauthorized transfers, massive ones. They're draining the liquidity." "Freeze them," Julian barked. "I can't. The authorization code came from your device. The system thinks it's you. They're moving the money to offshore shell companies, Cayman Islands, Panama." "How much?" $2 billion. And counting." Julian slammed his fist onto the table. "They aren't just taking over the company. They are bankrupting it. They're going to buy the carcass for pennies on the dollar tomorrow morning." He turned to Adela. You heard her say Marcus. Did she say anything else? A location? A meeting place?" Adela closed her eyes, thinking back to the echo of the bathroom. She said, "They're in position." And then, something about the foundry. Julian and Mason exchanged a look. "The foundry," Julian said darkly. "Sterling's old manufacturing plant in Brooklyn. It's abandoned." "It's where he operates his off-book deals," Mason confirmed. "If Elena is going there, she's taking the phone to him to finalize the transfer." Julian grabbed a sleek, black tactical vest from a rack on the wall. He started strapping it on over his ruined dress shirt. "Mason, load up. We're going to Brooklyn." "I'm coming with you," Adela said, standing up. Julian laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You? You're a waitress. You'll get killed." "I'm the only witness you have," Adela said, stepping forward. "If you go in there and shoot everyone, you go to jail. You need someone to prove that Elena and Marcus conspired to steal your company. I heard the call. I can testify." "Testimony won't help if we're dead," Julian said. "Also," Adela added, playing her ace card, "I know the layout of the foundry." Julian paused. "How?" "My father," Adela said, her voice dropping. "He worked there for 30 years, before Sterling fired everyone and stole their pensions. My dad was the foreman. I used to go there after school. I know the tunnels underneath. If you walk in the front door, they'll see you coming. I can get you in through the old drainage system." Julian stared at her. For the first time, he didn't see a waitress. He saw an ally. "What did you say your father's name was?" "Frank Jenkins." Julian nodded slowly. "Frank was a good man. I remember him trying to unionize against Sterling." He threw a Kevlar vest at her. It hit her in the chest, heavy and stiff. "Put it on, Jenkins. You want to save my company? You want revenge for your dad? Tonight's your chance." Adela strapped the vest on. It smelled like gun oil and fear. "Let's go get your empire back," she said. The drive to Brooklyn was a blur of neon lights and rain-slicked pavement. The tactical silence inside the SUV was suffocating. Julian sat typing furiously on a backup tablet, trying to firewall what remained of his assets, while Adela stared out the window, watching the city that had chewed her up and spit her out. The foundry was a behemoth of red brick and shattered glass, sitting on the edge of the East River like a tombstone. It had been closed for a decade, ever since Marcus Sterling bought it, stripped the machinery, and fired 500 workers, including Frank Jenkins. "Kill the lights," Julian ordered as they approached the perimeter. Mason cut the engine a block away. The vehicle coasted into the shadows of a crumbling overpass. "There are guards at the main gate," Mason observed, handing Julian a pair of thermal binoculars. "Two on the roof, one patrolling the loading dock." "They're expecting a frontal assault," Julian said, lowering the binoculars. He turned to Adela. "You said there's another way." Adela nodded, her throat dry. She pointed toward the riverbank, where tall weeds obscured a rusted iron grate. "The storm overflow. It runs directly under the main assembly floor. My dad used to sneak down there to smoke when the foreman was on the prowl. He showed me the grate when I was a kid." "Lead the way," Julian said. They moved in a crouch, the damp night air biting through Adela's thin uniform and the heavy tactical vest. The mud along the riverbank sucked at her worn sneakers. When they reached the grate, it was welded shut with rust. "Mason," Julian signaled. The massive security chief gripped the iron bars. With a grunt of exertion that corded the muscles in his neck, he wrenched the grate free, metal screeching in protest. They froze, waiting for a reaction from the guards. Nothing. The wind off the river masked the sound. "Ladies first," Julian whispered, though there was no mockery in his tone anymore. Adela slipped into the darkness. The smell hit her instantly. Stagnant water, mold, and old grease. It smelled like her childhood memories of waiting for her dad at the factory gates. They waded through knee-deep water. Adela traced the slime-covered brick walls with her fingers. "Left here," she whispered, then a sharp right at the junction. As they moved deeper, the air grew heavy. Adela slipped on a patch of moss, splashing loudly. Julian's hand shot out, grabbing her arm to steady her. His grip was firm, warm. "You okay?" he murmured. "I'm fine," she hissed. "My dad, he died of lung complications from breathing the dust in this place. Sterling cut the ventilation budget to save money." Julian fell silent. The reality of the corporate war he played was hitting him in the face. For him, numbers on a spreadsheet were just profit or loss. For Adela, they were life and death. "I'm sorry," Julian said, his voice echoing slightly in the tunnel. "Don't be sorry," Adela said, pushing forward. "Be the man who takes Sterling down." They reached a ladder set into the wall, rusted and treacherous. Above them, a circular maintenance hatch let in slivers of yellow light. "We're under the main floor," Adela said. "This comes up in the old tool storage room. It should be empty." Mason went up first, gun drawn. He pushed the hatch open an inch, scanning the room. He gave the all-clear signal. They climbed up, emerging into a dusty room filled with cobwebs and broken crates. The sound of voices drifted through the thin walls. Julian moved to the door, peering through a crack in the wood. His jaw tightened. "We're in," he whispered, "and the party is in full swing." He motioned for Adela to look. She squinted through the crack. The vast main floor of the factory, once filled with assembly lines, was now a makeshift command center. Servers were humming on folding tables, cables running like snakes across the concrete floor. In the center, sitting on a leather chair brought in for the occasion, was Marcus Sterling. He was older than Julian, balding, with a cruel mouth. And standing next to him, still in her red dress, was Eleanor. She was holding Julian's phone. Adela felt a surge of nausea. It was real. The betrayal wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a tableau of treason right in front of her eyes. "They're connecting the phone to the server," Julian noted, his voice ice-cold. "They're bypassing the biometric lock." "How much time do we have?" Adela asked. Julian checked his watch. "Once they bridge the connection? Maybe 5 minutes before the funds clear. We have to move. Now." Mason checked the magazine of his pistol. "I count 6 hostiles on the floor, plus Sterling and the girl." "Non-lethal for the girl," Julian said automatically. Then he paused. He looked at Elena laughing as she handed the phone to a technician. Unless she draws a weapon. The hardening of his heart was palpable. Adela watched the man she had served wine to just 2 hours ago transform into a soldier. There's a gantry. Adela pointed upward to the rusted steel walkways suspended above the factory floor. If we can get up there, we have the high ground. We can drop down right behind the server bank. Good eye, Mason grunted. They slipped out of the storage room, moving like shadows through the periphery of the factory floor. The noise of the servers and the humming of portable generators covered their footsteps. They climbed a spiral staircase to the catwalks. From high above, the scene below looked like a perverse surgery. The technicians were the doctors, Julian's phone was the patient, and they were extracting the lifeblood of Thorn Industries. They crept along the metal grating. Through the gaps, Adela could hear the conversation perfectly. "You're sure this works?" Elena asked, her voice echoing. "I don't want to be a fugitive with no money, Marcus." Marcus Sterling laughed, lighting a cigar. "Relax, darling. The code is cracking the encryption as we speak. You'll have your 20 million within the hour." 20? Elena's voice sharpened. "We agreed on 50. "Market fluctuations," Marcus shrugged. "Besides, you didn't exactly handle the dinner smoothly. Security footage shows you ran out like a scared rabbit." "I did what I had to do," Elena snapped. "Do you know how hard it was to pretend to love him? He's so earnest. It was pathetic, always talking about building a legacy. He's a boy playing a man's game." Up on the catwalk, Julian flinched as if he'd been slapped. Adela instinctively reached out and touched his shoulder. He looked at her, his eyes full of pain and rage. He took a deep breath, centering himself. "And what about the waitress?" Marcus asked. "My men said she disappeared with him." "She's a nobody," Elena scoffed. "A servant. She probably ran home to her cats. She doesn't know anything." Adela gritted her teeth. "A nobody." "Sir," a technician called out. "We're in. Biometrics bypassed. Initiating final transfer sequence. Completion in 90 seconds. A giant monitor on the table lit up. A progress bar appeared. "Transfer initiated." "Now," Julian whispered. Mason attached a silencer to his weapon. "I'll take the 2 guards by the south door. Julian, you take the tech. Adela, stay down." "No," Julian said. "I need Adela to cut the power." Adela blinked. "What?" "The generators." Julian pointed to the yellow machines chugging away in the corner. "If you cut the main cable, the servers crash. The transfer stops. Can you do it?" It was a 40-foot run across an exposed section of the floor below. "I can do it," Adela said, though her heart was hammering. "On my mark," Julian said. Mason lined up his shot. Julian moved to a position directly above Sterling. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Thwip. Thwip. Mason's shots were impossibly accurate. 2 guards crumpled silently. Julian vaulted over the railing, dropping 10 feet onto a stack of pallets, rolling and coming up with his fists raised. "Sterling!" His voice boomed across the cavernous factory. Marcus Sterling jumped, dropping his cigar. Elena screamed, spinning around. "Julian!" She gasped, her face draining of color. "Stop the transfer!" Julian roared, charging toward the server table. "Kill him!" Sterling shouted to the remaining guards. Gunfire erupted. Bullets sparked off the machinery. Julian dove behind a heavy steel press. That was Adela's cue. She scrambled down the ladder at the far end of the catwalk. She hit the concrete floor running. "There's the girl!" A guard shouted. He raised his rifle. Adela didn't look. She sprinted toward the yellow generators. She could hear the bullets whizzing past her, snapping the air like angry hornets. For Dad, she thought. For the nobody. She reached the generator. A thick black cable snaked out of it, feeding the server bank. There was no switch. She looked around. A fire axe hung on the wall in a glass case. She smashed the glass with her elbow, ignoring the pain. She grabbed the axe. The heavy wood handle felt good in her hands. "No!" Sterling screamed, seeing what she was about to do. Adela swung the axe with all the strength of a woman who had carried heavy trays for 12 hours a day for 5 years. Crunch! The axe blade bit deep into the thick rubber insulation. Sparks showered her, blinding and hot. The lights in the factory flickered. The servers whined and died. The giant monitor went black. "Transfer failed!" the technician yelled, panic in his voice. "System crash!" Silence fell over the factory for a heartbeat. The only light now came from the emergency red strobes pulsing on the walls, bathing the scene in a hellish crimson glow. Adela stood panting, the axe handle vibrating in her hands. She had done it. But then she heard the click of a hammer being pulled back. She turned slowly. Elena was standing 10 feet away. She was holding a small, silver pistol, and it was pointed directly at Adela's heart. "You little rat," Elena hissed. Her hair was wild, her composure completely shattered. "You ruined everything." Adela stood her ground, though her knees were shaking. "I saved him from you." "Saved him?" Elena laughed, a manic sound. "You think he cares about you? You're just a tool. Once this is over, he'll toss you aside just like he does everyone else." "Drop the gun, Elena." Julian stepped out from behind the steel press. He was bleeding from a graze on his cheek, his suit in tatters. "Stay back, Julian!" Elena shrieked, swinging the gun between Adela and Julian. "I swear I'll kill her. I have nothing left to lose." Marcus Sterling emerged from the shadows, flanked by his last 2 standing guards. He looked furious, but calculated. "Well played, Thorne," Marcus spat. "But you're outnumbered, and your little girlfriend here is about to paint the floor red." "She's not my girlfriend," Julian said, stepping slowly closer, his hands raised. "She's the only honest person in this room." "Honesty doesn't pay the bills," Marcus sneered. "Elena, shoot the girl, then shoot him. We can reboot the servers. We just need time." Elena's hand trembled. The gun barrel wavered. "Elena," Julian said, his voice soft, persuasive. "Look at me. You don't want to do this. This is murder. Corporate theft is one thing. This is life in a prison." "I'm already dead," Elena cried, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand, Julian. I owe people. Bad people. Gambling debts. Marcus bought my debt. If I don't give him the company, they'll kill me." Julian paused. The pieces fell into place. The desperation. The anxiety at dinner. She wasn't a mastermind. She was a victim of her own vices, trapped in a web. "I can help you," Julian said. "Put the gun down. We can fix this." "It's too late," Elena sobbed. Her finger tightened on the trigger, aiming at Adela. "No," Julian lunged, not at Elena, but at Adela. He threw his body in front of the waitress just as the gun went off. Bang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Julian grunted, his body jerking back as if hit by a sledgehammer. He collapsed onto Adela, the weight of him driving her to the concrete floor. "Julian!" Adela screamed, scrambling out from under him. Blood was blossoming on his white shirt, just below the shoulder. Elena dropped the gun, her hands flying to her mouth. I didn't mean... Secure the room!" Mason's voice roared from the catwalks. Mason, having flanked them during the standoff, opened fire with a submachine gun. He sprayed the ground in front of Sterling's guards. They dropped their weapons instantly, realizing they were outmatched. Sterling looked at the guards, then at Eleanor, and broke into a run toward the loading bay doors. "Mason, get him!" Adela yelled, pressing her hands against Julian's wound. "I'm on him!" Mason sprinted after Sterling, disappearing into the dark. Adela ripped off her apron and pressed it hard against Julian's chest. The blood was hot and sticky. "Julian! Julian, look at me!" His eyes fluttered open. They were hazy. Did we stop the transfer?" "Yes," Adela cried, tears mixing with the grime on her face. "We stopped it. You saved me. Why did you do that?" Julian managed a weak, blood-stained smile. "Investments need protecting." "You idiot," she sobbed, applying more pressure. "Don't you dare die on me. You still owe me a tip." Elena was standing frozen, staring at what she had done. "Help me," Adela screamed at her. "There's a first aid kit on the wall. Get it!" Elena blinked, snapping out of her trance. She looked at the man she had almost married, bleeding out on the cold concrete. Guilt, heavy and crushing, finally broke through her self-preservation. She ran to the wall, grabbed the kit, and ran back, dropping to her knees. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered, handing Adela the bandages. "I'm so sorry." "Save it for the judge," Adela snapped, ripping open a pressure bandage and packing the wound. "Keep pressure here. Don't let go." Adela stood up. Her hands were covered in Julian's blood. She looked around the factory. The red emergency lights were still pulsing. She heard a siren in the distance. Police. Mason must have called them. But then, a low rumble shook the floor beneath their feet. It wasn't the police. It was coming from the basement. From the tunnels. "The boiler," Adela whispered, her eyes widening. "Sterling. He didn't just cut the ventilation budget. He bypassed the safety valves on the main boiler to save on maintenance. If the power cut killed the cooling pumps. The boiler is going to blow," Adela realized. She looked at Julian, barely conscious, at Elena, useless and weeping, at the exit 100 yards away. "We have to move him," Adela commanded. "Now!" "He can't walk," Elena cried. "Then we drag him." Adela grabbed Julian's good arm. "Grab the other side, unless you want to die here with your debts." They hauled Julian up. He groaned, his head lolling. They began the agonizing drag toward the loading dock doors, the floor beneath them vibrating violently as the pressure in the antique boiler reached critical mass. The basement of the foundry was no longer a building. It was a bomb waiting to detonate. The antique boiler, pushed beyond its limits by the sudden power failure that killed the cooling pumps, was screaming. It was a high-pitched, mechanical shriek of tearing metal and escaping steam that vibrated in the very marrow of Adela's bones. The heat was absolute. It pressed against them like a physical weight, searing the air in their lungs. Every breath tasted of copper and sulfur. "He's too heavy!" Elena screamed, her voice jagged with panic. She stumbled, her high heels snapping on the oil-slicked concrete, nearly dropping Julian's left side. "Get up!" Adela roared, her voice raw. She grabbed Elena's silk dress and yanked her upright. "If you drop him, I will leave you here to burn. Move!" They were a grotesque, three-legged creature, stumbling through the cavernous loading bay. Julian was dead weight between them, his feet dragging through the dust, leaving a long, smeary trail of crimson blood. He groaned low in his throat, a sound of agony that spurred Adela on faster than the fear of death ever could. The ground beneath them bucked violently. A pipe burst overhead, spraying a jet of scalding steam that missed Adela's face by inches. "The ramp!" Adela gasped, seeing the rectangle of moonlight 50 yards ahead. "We're almost there." But 50 yards felt like 50 miles. Her muscles were screaming, lactic acid burning in her legs. She was a waitress. She was used to double shifts and aching feet. But this was a different kind of endurance. This was carrying a life. They hit the incline of the loading ramp. The cool night air rushed in to meet them, clashing with the furnace heat of the factory, creating a swirling fog at the entrance. "Clear the area, fall back," the voice came from outside. Mason. They burst out of the darkness of the warehouse into the blinding glare of police floodlights. "Down! Get down!" Mason bellowed, sprinting toward them from the cover of a squad car. They didn't have time to run further. Crack! It started with a sound like the sky splitting open. The structural supports of the factory gave way. Then came the roar. Boom! The explosion didn't just happen behind them. It moved through them. The shockwave hit Adela like a giant invisible hand, lifting her off her feet and throwing her forward. The world dissolved into a blinding white light and a cacophony of shattering glass. She hit the wet asphalt hard, skinning her palms, the breath knocked out of her. She instinctively curled into a ball, covering her head as debris rained down around them. Chunks of red brick, twisted rebar and flaming insulation showered the parking lot, pinging off the hoods of the police cruisers like hail from hell. For a long moment, there was only the ringing in her ears, a high, piercing tone that drowned out the world. Then, sound rushed back in, the crackle of fire, the wail of sirens, the shouting of men. Adela coughed, spitting out grit and ash. She pushed herself up on trembling arms. The foundry was gone. In its place stood a skeletal ruin, gutted by flames that licked high into the Brooklyn night. "Julian!" The name tore from her throat. She scrambled on her hands and knees through the mud. He was lying face down 10 feet away, his suit jacket shredded, his body still. "No, no, no," Adela sobbed, reaching him. She rolled him over. His face was grey, illuminated by the flickering firelight. The blood on his chest was dark and terrifyingly abundant. She pressed her hands over the wound, feeling the hot, sticky slickness of it. "Stay with me. You don't get to quit. You're a billionaire. Buy some more time. Medic! We need a medic!" Mason was there, dropping to his knees beside her. He looked terrified. For the first time, the stoic security chief looked like a man about to lose a friend. Paramedics swarmed them, pushing Adela's hands away. "BP is dropping! He's in hypovolemic shock! Get the line in. Prepare for transport." Adela was shoved back, helpless, her hands covered in the blood of the man she had just met, yet somehow knew better than anyone. She sat back on her heels, shivering violently as the adrenaline crashed. She looked to her left. Elena was sitting on the rear bumper of a police cruiser. She was unharmed, physically, but her eyes were dead. A female officer was methodically reading her rights while locking handcuffs around her wrists. The red dress, once a symbol of her status and power, was torn and ruined, stained with the filth of the factory floor. Elena looked up. Her gaze met Adela's across the chaotic expanse of the emergency scene. There was no anger left in her expression, no arrogance, just the hollow realization of a gambler who had bet everything and lost. She looked at the burning factory, her retirement plan going up in smoke, and then lowered her head as the officer guided her into the back of the car. "We got Sterling," Mason said, his voice grim. He stood over Adela, offering a hand. He tried to swim the channel. NYPD Harbor Unit fished him out. He's freezing, wet, and going away for life. Adela took Mason's hand, but she didn't stand up. She looked at the ambulance where they were loading Julian. "Is he?" Adela couldn't finish the sentence. "He's a fighter," Mason said, though his eyes were worried. "But he's lost a lot of blood." "I'm going with him," Adela said. It wasn't a request. "Hospital policy says family only," Mason began. "I don't care about policy," Adela snapped, fire returning to her eyes. "I'm the one who stopped the bleeding. I'm the one who dragged him out. I am not leaving him." Mason looked at her, really looked at her, and nodded. He turned to the paramedic. "She rides. She's security detail." The paramedic didn't argue. Adela climbed into the back of the ambulance, squeezing into the corner bench as the door slammed shut. sealing out the noise of the fire. The ride was a blur of lights and medical jargon. Adela reached out and took Julian's hand. It was cold. His callous, large hand felt lifeless in hers. "You promised," she whispered to the unconscious man, squeezing his fingers. "You promised me a tip. Don't you dare die on an unpaid bill, Julian Thorne." The heart monitor beeped steadily, a fragile, rhythmic promise of life. Beep, beep, beep. 2 weeks later. The private wing of Mount Sinai Hospital smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax. It was a place of hushed tones and soft lighting, a stark contrast to the grime and noise of the factory. Adela stood outside room 402, hesitating. She looked down at her clothes. She wasn't wearing her uniform. She was wearing a simple navy blouse and jeans she had bought from a discount rack. She felt like an imposter. She had saved his life, yes. But now that the dust had settled, the gap between their worlds felt like a canyon again. He was Julian Thorne, master of the universe. She was Adela Jenkins, unemployed waitress. "You know the nurses charge by the hour for loitering," a voice called out from inside the room. Adela smiled, the tension breaking. She pushed the door open. Julian was sitting up in bed, propped against a mountain of pillows. His left arm was in a sling, strapped tight to his chest, but his right hand was flying across the keyboard of a laptop. He looked paler than usual, a little thinner, but the sharpness in his grey eyes was undimmed. "Working? Seriously?" Adela asked, walking to the foot of the bed. "The world doesn't stop just because I took a bullet," Julian said, though he closed the laptop lid. "Besides, I had some loose ends to tie up. Thorne Industries just acquired the assets of Sterling Dynamics at a liquidation auction this morning. Pennies on the dollar." "Ruthless," Adela said, sitting in the visitor's chair. "Justice," Julian corrected. "Marcus Sterling was denied bail. He's facing charges for corporate espionage, attempted murder, and arson. He'll never see the outside of a cell again." "And Elena?" Adela asked quietly. Julian's expression softened, just a fraction. "She pled guilty. She's cooperating with the DA in exchange for a reduced sentence. She'll serve 10 years. He looked out the window at the city skyline. "I trusted her, Adela. That's the part that stings the most. I pride myself on seeing angles, but I was blind." "You were in love," Adela said. "Love has a way of blurring the vision." "Maybe," Julian turned his gaze to her. "But you weren't blind. You saw everything. Mason told me you haven't been back to l'Orangerie." "Henri fired me via text message," Adela laughed dryly. "Apparently, fraternizing with customers during a shootout is against the employee handbook. I'm currently looking for work." "Good," Julian said, "because I'm hiring." He reached for a thick manila envelope on his bedside table and slid it across the sheets toward her. Adela hesitated. "Julian, I didn't save you for a reward. I don't want charity." "Open it," he commanded gently. "It's not charity. It's a business proposal." Adela opened the clasp. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a letter from the Dean of Columbia Law School. It was a confirmation of a fully endowed scholarship, tuition, housing, books, and a stipend under the Frank Jenkins Memorial Fund. Adela's breath hitched. "My dad? You named it after my dad?" "He worked at that factory for 30 years, Julian said softly. "He deserved better than he got. This is my way of balancing the ledger." Adela blinked back tears, her hand trembling as she lifted the second document. It was an employment contract. Position: Junior Legal Analyst, Thorne Industries. Salary: $120,000 a year. "I don't understand," Adela stammered. "I haven't even finished my degree." "You have the instincts of a shark, Adela," Julian said, leaning forward, wincing slightly as his wound pulled. "You saw through a conspiracy that fooled my entire board of directors. You memorized a factory layout from your childhood. You improvised a weapon from a fire axe. I can teach you the law. I can't teach you that kind of grit." He looked her dead in the eye. "I don't need another yes man in a suit. I need someone who will tell me the truth, even when I don't want to hear it. I need a partner I can trust. Will you work for me?" Adela looked at the contract, then at Julian. For years she had felt invisible, powerless, a ghost moving through the world of the rich, refilling their glasses while they ignored her existence. But Julian saw her. He saw her value. "I'll take the job," Adela said, her voice steady, "on one condition." "Name it," Julian said. "No more working dinners. If we eat at a place where the napkins are paper and the ketchup comes in packets." Julian laughed, a genuine warm sound that erased the last lingering shadows of the factory. "Deal." He reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a small, crinkled object. He held it up. It was the slip of paper. The corners were worn, and it was stained with a drop of dried Petrus wine and a smear of his own blood. "Your girlfriend sold you out. They're in position." "Why do you still have that?" Adela asked. "To remind me," Julian said, turning the paper over in his fingers. "To remind me that the most valuable thing I own isn't my company or my stock portfolio or my reputation." He looked at Adela, his eyes intense and full of promise. "It reminds me that one slip of paper can save a life, and that sometimes the person you're looking for has been standing right in front of you the whole time, pouring your water." Adela smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. She picked up the pen from the nightstand and signed the contract with a flourish. "Well then, boss," she said, standing up. "I believe you owe me a burger, and this time I'm not serving it." "Let's go," Julian said, pressing the button to call the nurse for his discharge papers. "I have a feeling this is going to be the best meal of my life." Adela Jenkins began her night as a shadow in the background, a waitress meant to be neither seen nor heard. She ended it as the savior of a titan, proving that courage has no dress code and intelligence isn't defined by your bank account. In a world of deception, her single act of honesty brought down a conspiracy and forged an unbreakable bond. This story reminds us that we all have a choice. When we see something wrong, we can look away or we can speak up. Adela spoke up. She risked her livelihood and her life for a stranger, and in doing so, she rewrote her own destiny. It serves as a powerful testament that sometimes the smallest actions, a note on a napkin, can have the biggest impact. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps us create more thrilling stories like this one. What would you have done if you were in Adela's shoes? Would you have slipped the note, or would you have stayed out of it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. We have plenty more drama, twists and romance coming your way. Thanks for watching.